today or this evening to discuss the science behind how children learn to read and strategies parents may use in supporting their children to become proficient readers. One of the hallmarks of McLean's transformative approach to education is that we meet the needs of our students and learners, focusing first on their strengths and supporting any challenges they may have. I hope that tonight's webinar is informative. I'd ask that you please hold your questions for the end when we'll have a dedicated time for some Q&A. And please chat those questions to me during the presentation directly to me, Kathy Patterson. Please note that we will be recording this evening's discussion, but we will only be recording the presenters. So with that, I will turn things over to Natalie.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I am the Master Reading Coordinator at McLean School, which means that I am in charge of the reading for all students, kindergarten through 12th grade. And so I work with teachers to make sure that every student is getting the reading instruction that they need in order to thrive. And today we're going to focus in particular on our youngest readers, those in kindergarten, first and second grade. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an understanding of how children learn to read. So let's start with a little test, and you can test yourself. If you'd like to type your answers in the chat, you may, but you don't feel like you need to. So number one, true or false, reading is a natural process. So this is actually false. Speaking is a natural process, and the brain is wired for speech and doesn't really need to be taught to speak in any sort of systematic way. But reading is not a natural process, and it's not hardwired into the brain. And so students do need to be taught how to read. Question two, reading includes at least 3 parts of the brain. True or false? So this is actually true. There are 3 parts of the brain that in typical readers will work together in order to help the student to read fluently and easily. And when there are underlying reading disabilities, it's because of a disruption in one of these 3 parts of the brain. Last one. Good readers do not need to read every single letter and every single word to understand the text. True or false? This one is actually false. In order to read a text fluently and easily, good readers do have to look at every single letter and every single word. And sometimes adults think that we look at whole words and we skip words or are filling in letters in our minds. But that's actually not the case. We just do it so quickly and automatically that it feels to us like we're not reading every single letter. But for a child who is learning to read, they absolutely have to effortfully look at every letter and every word. All right, let's take a look at why this is the case. So sometimes people think that reading is not like rocket science, but in fact, reading teachers and people who are teaching very young children to read know that it is an incredibly complex skill. It is built on 2 different systems that have to be woven together. The first system is just a student's language comprehension. This is like what they know about the world, what they know about vocabulary, what they know about how sentences put together, and then also what they know about texts and how texts work. For example, a child who's never heard about the solar system or doesn't have any comprehension of it is going to have a really hard time reading a text about Venus or Mars because they need the background language comprehension in order to be able to do that. But tonight we're going to focus in particularly on word recognition. And word recognition is split into 3 parts. It's the knowledge of how sounds come together to make words, and that's called phonological awareness. It's an understanding of how letters and letter combinations represent sounds in written language, and that's called decoding and spelling if they're writing those out. And it's also a development of a series of words, a large body of words in the mind that the child can recognize on sight because they've decoded them many times before. So we're going to focus on those 3 areas today because those are the areas that we develop very explicitly in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade in order to help kids read printed words on the page. And in a strong reading program, the teacher is going to be simultaneously developing a child's language comprehension in a different part of the day, the school day, so that each of these strands is taught separately when students are beginning to learn to read. Over here, you can see how all the strands are isolated. And then as they move through the elementary years and into the middle school years, the strands become more automatic and strategic and become more tightly woven together until a student is doing all of these things at once in an automatic and fluent way. So let's start first with phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is an important skill for learning to read. However, it doesn't involve any written or printed language. It's about the ability to notice, think about, and work with sounds in spoken words. So we do a lot of work with children to help them identify the first sound in word. What's the first sound in ball? But we help them identify the last sound. What's the last sound in ball? Oh. We help them identify the middle sound, which in ball is actually an A that is representing the ah sound. We help them take apart sounds. So j, p, jump is all of the sounds in jump. And we help them to either say jump and then take it apart, j, p, or we tell them the sounds and then they blend it together into the word. We also do some work with taking away a sound, adding a sound, or changing a sound. So I have here a recording of one of the friends at school named Henry. He's age 6. And he is doing one of our first sound fluency assessments. We assess our students 3 times a year to make sure that they are making progress towards fluent reading at every grade level. So this is Henry's recent assessment. In this, you'll hear him tell you the first sound in each word. He's not seeing any of the words, but I gave you the visual here in case that helps you. And he is a little quiet. He was a tiny bit nervous to be audio recorded, but I will do my best to help you hear him. So here's Henry. Now I'm going to tell you the word, and I want you to tell me the first sound in the word. Here we go. Laughed. Good. Pine. Skirt. Flag. Rang. Crow. Hide. Blame. Deck. Crab. Bright. Knock. Trash. List. Spring. Chief. Brand. Sweat. Shelf. Herd. Crisp. Plow. Hat. Good, we're gonna stop there. You did a great job. So we see how many children can do in a minute. And for Henry, who is 6 and in kindergarten, he is at an appropriate point in order to be able to develop fluent reading as he goes through the grade levels. So predictively, we expect that Henry will be an on-grade level reader when he reaches, he is now in kindergarten, but as he goes on, he's in a strong position to continue to develop into a strong reader. This is a type of activity that you can easily do at home with your child. You can play it as a game, and first sounds are the easiest ones. Last sounds and middle sounds are harder, but these are things that you can practice with your child. And you can see the direct connection to then reading and writing, because when a student looks at a word, they need to look at that first letter and say that first sound in order to decode. Then they need to be able to say each sound in order and blend them together. When they're writing, they have to say the word first, and think about that first sound, write it down, and then say the next sound in the word. And that's how reading develops, reading and writing. So here are some different games you can play at home that would particularly help with phonemic awareness, or the ability to notice and manipulate sounds in words. So practicing little guessing games with rhymes, or doing I Spy with first sounds, like I spy something that starts with a S. Or when you're at the grocery store, looking around down the aisle and saying, do you see something that starts with a P? Or you can also do this one where it's syllables, right? And if you see an eggplant, you can ask them how many syllables are in the word eggplant and help them get ready to hear those different parts of the word. There's a few more here. So this is another version of I Spy where you're blending, and you can say to your child, I see a sign that says stop. And then the child has to say what that sign would say to them. And they can break apart words that you have in pictures of books or magazines. So if you're reading a book and you see a dog in the picture, you can say, this is a dog, look, dog. Or you can ask them how many sounds in dog, or ask them to tell you the sounds in dog. The last little game to play is called Snail Talk, which is where you tell them a word very slowly and see if they can tell you that word much more quickly. Students who struggle with these type of activities will need more time and instruction in order to learn to read. But any practice that you give at home will really help them advance their skills. And even students who struggle tremendously will get better with more practice. So if this is hard for your child, just keep practicing. If this is easy for your child, then they're definitely ready to go on to look at some of the other elements that prepare kids for reading. So a lot of parents teach their children to recognize letter names, and that is good because it helps the child distinguish and notice that there is a difference between, say, an A and a B. They're not just all black lines on a page. They have different names and different functions. So it's good for children to know the different names for the letters, but unfortunately the names don't help them read because it's the sound that the letter makes that is the most helpful part in learning to read. But I will show you a little clip of Henry reading the letter sounds. And again, he's a good example of a child that is developing typically and is likely to be able to read very proficiently. So you would want, to work towards this level of letter recognition, and you'll be able to hear him. He's very confident in this one. You have 1 minute to read these letters. Go ahead and start.
F J Z V E X T E V G F W Q E Q L C O O R N C W G E D.
Good.
U P Y S M X L K Z A Y H J I K U G M R A N H C I D Z
That's a B.
E S F F U L A M B V T Y G E W.
You can stop there. Thank you very much.
Did it only record to my voice?
I think it did, but so then we listened to it again because he was curious about how it worked. So you hear him reverse or really think about the D and the B there a couple of times. That's natural for an end of kindergartner. It's not a concern at all. You also hear him look at the F's a couple of times and miscue and say the sound of the F instead of the name, and then he corrects himself. These are all sort of typical errors that you would see in a child that is developing naturally towards being a fluent reader. If kids really can't tell the difference between the letters, or they have a hard time remembering the names of the letters, that can indicate that they are going to need a lot more practice because they're having trouble recalling what to say when they see that particular symbol on the page. And there's one of those 3 areas of the brain that we talked about that's part of reading, the reading brain, that is particularly involved in recalling what to say when you see a certain letter or a letter pattern. And that's one area where a language disability can come out, is if that area of the brain is not functioning in the typical way.
I have 1 minute to
Oops.
read these letters.
Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so moving on to decoding, how students take letters on the printed page that are formed into words and sentences and make them into meaningful words and speech, right? It's something that they can understand and learn from. So we have 26 letters in the English language, but we have 56 sounds, which means that some of the letters make multiple sounds, or there are combinations of letters together that make a different sound than each of the letters in that combination alone. And we actually have more than 100 what we call graphemes, which is ways to write the sound. So for example, A is one of the sounds of the letter A is ah. That's the first sound that we teach children. But it's also a part of the OA combination, as in boat. And so when a student sees OA together, they have to know to say O instead of ah. And so that's why there's all of these different graphemes. CH is another grapheme. When you see CH, you say ch, not k and h, right? And so we have to spread these out so that students are able to learn them in a way that is not overwhelming. And that's appropriately paced for their development. So I'm going to show you which graphemes students typically learn in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade in order to be able to emerge from those 3 grades reading fluently and accurately. So for kindergarten, we teach, schools teach people who use the science of reading will teach the 5 short vowel sounds and also almost all of the consonants, as well as what we call digraphs. These are 2 letters together that make one sound, like the WH in whale, which makes the same sound as the W in wag if you're from the Chesapeake Bay. If you're from a different part of the country, sometimes the WH makes a different sound, but here it makes the same. Or a TH or an SH, those are digraphs. So these are all the things that students have to learn. We teach them in this order, actually, COAD going down and then up to the next, because this allows us to have kids practice reading some words very early in the year. So after about the 5th or 6th week of school, kids can read nonsense words that involve the letters C, O, A, D, and G, right? So at this point, kids could read D, og, or g, ak, k, ad. So they'll mix them up, and some of them are real words, right, like dog, and some of them are nonsense words like doc. Well, doc is kind of a real word, like short for doctor. So as they go, they read both real and nonsense words. And the reason why we do real and nonsense words is because nonsense words end up being part of longer words that they will encounter as older children. So DEM, dem, is part of democracy. And so we're preparing kids to later on read syllables, which are often made up of short nonsense words. So this is what a kindergartner needs to learn. It's a lot. A teacher really has to stay focused each week on introducing a new sound and making sure the student is able to say the sound and to also then blend sounds together based on the sounds that they have learned so far. So once we get to like CH, kids could read ch, at, right? Or other things like that. And that's what a typical kindergartner should be doing. They're not, even though we sometimes see kindergartners reading full books or just like starting chapter books, that's not typical. It happens, but it's not what we would expect. what you should see students doing in this area or at this age is 3 or maybe 4 letter words, and just putting those words together to make, putting those sounds together to make a short word. Here are some examples of real words that kids can read when they are in kindergarten, and some nonsense words. And I think we're going to hear from Henry for the last time. He's going to read these nonsense words for you to show you what a student in a strong position in kindergarten is able to do.
Get these nonsense words to me. Start over here and go across and then go down to the next row. You can tell me the whole word or the sounds in the word. Are you ready? Good, keep going.
King, Joe, Dust, Limbs, Muck. Laugh, what is that?
You're right, it's lav. Good.
But job, ho, jit, less, lads, rob, that, no, huh, it, the, best, hand, dove, yeah.
Good, stop there. You did great. Get these nonsense.
So a student who's able to do this at the end of kindergarten is very, very likely to be a strong reader as they go forward. That's why we give this test. They're able to, they know the sounds of all the consonants and all the short vowels at this point. You could hear him do it, and they can blend them together. Notice Henry is actually looking at each letter and saying each sound. Now, we use nonsense words because we actually don't want kids to memorize words and read from memory, because they will be able to do that. There are kids with strong memories who can do that in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and they can memorize all the types of words that are common in those types of, that level of text. Then those students typically have a really hard time when they get to 3rd grade and the words become longer and they can't memorize all of them. Because they just need to be able to say each sound in the word and blend them together. And that's what real decoding is.
Get these nonsense words to me.
Sorry.
Start over.
All right, so there are some games to play with your kindergartner at home that will help them really get attuned to the sounds of words and to the sounds of letters and the look of letters. So alphabet scavenger hunt is a good one. If you're reading a book, just have them look for all the A's or all the B's or all the C's. That'll help them with letter recognition. You can also have your kindergartner help you write the grocery store list, as long as you're just using about like the first sound or the last sound in the letter. You can, in the first or last sound in the word. You can have them trace letters and say the sound. That's a really good one. Our kindergartners really love these songs about each letter that come from YouTube, and they're called Super Simple ABC songs. I'll just play it really quickly for you so you can see how cute it is. They just love these.
Octopus, 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 octopus.
It just repeats like that because it's a super simple song. But they love the little octopus that goes back and forth. And the main thing is that they're hearing the letter over and over. They're hearing that sound and they're connecting it with that letter. We teach the lowercase letters because most of the letters that a kid is going to see in a sentence are lowercase. So at kindergarten, we really focus in on the lowercase letter first. But by the end, we do make sure that they know all the uppercase letters as well. One thing to be really cautious about when you're saying the letter sounds, people commonly add vowel after the sound to sort of emphasize it. Like for the B, people will say buh. And that's sort of just to make the letter easier to hear. But the problem is that if you have a large on the end of your b, then when you go to try to blend words together, you might have at, which doesn't sound like bat, it sounds like ba'ata. And so it's harder for kids to blend those together. So you want to try to clip the consonant sounds and leave that off as much as you can. So you would want to say b, t, but, or b, at, bat, in order to make blending easier for the kids and not add any extra vowel sounds in. So moving on to grade 1, you can see that what students need to learn in grade 1 really explodes. In some ways, it's something of a review or a building on of kindergarten because many of the words are blends. So if a student knows b and then it's not too hard for them to blend brr together, as in brag. If they know sp and ul, it's not too hard for them to blend them together to be splat, right? And we have also blends at the end, right? Like MCH at the end of bunch or SP at the end of gasp. And then towards the end of first grade, we have the magic E at the end. So A with E at the end, instead of saying it says A. I with E at the end, instead of it says I. And so these are sort of the things that a student needs to learn in first grade in order to be able to really stay on track and be a strong reader going into grade 2 and grade 3. Of course, if your student has a handle on this and like it's easy for them to blend these letters together because maybe they got really strong at looking at nonsense words when they were in kindergarten, then you can move on to the next piece. We don't try to keep kids back, but if they're able to master this, then they'll be in a strong position for second grade. We also teach students, and this is a really tricky concept for first graders, but it's super important, the difference between an open syllable and a closed syllable. When the vowel is in a syllable and it doesn't have a consonant directly after it, the vowel says its name. So over here, we have the vowel sounds that we taught in kindergarten, the short E, the short I, the short U, the short O, ah, eh. But if there is not a consonant at the end, it means that we're going to say that vowel sound in a different way. We're going to go from saying na to no, sob to so, wet to we, right? And so this is a really tricky thing for first graders because you have the exact same letter, but you are saying a different sound based on what letter comes next. And so first graders need a lot of practice with this, but it really helps lead them in to 2-syllable words and helping them be able to read more. So if a student can read hap and pen, they can read happen together. And so that's again where those nonsense words come in. So first grade is like a reinforcement and an extension of what was learned in kindergarten. But there are some tricky things in it because some of the letters that they have learned before represent more than one sound in English. Here are some real words that first graders can read. We would not expect kindergartners to be able to read these, and some nonsense words as well. You can think to yourself, if you are able to read these nonsense words, this one would be squin, in, chang, priff, and cree. Those are the nonsense words because there's no consonant blocking in that E. It says its name, cree. Now I have a Clara, and she is also 6, but she's in first grade. And she's going to show you how a typical first grader who is developing well and is going to be able to read on grade level as an older student, how she would read these sentences that include short vowels and blends and digraphs. So you can hear Clara read now.
Read me these sentences.
An elf sat on a flat fish.
Good.
The frog can jump on the log in the pond. A beast dog slept on a rug.
That you were right at first. A best dog slept on a rug.
A dog sat on the cat.
Last one.
The big fat rat ran from the fast
Chick. Read that sentence one more time.
The big fat rat ran from the fast chick.
Very good. Okay, now I'm gonna have you.
You can hear Clara there, and she is, when she pauses, and it's not totally captured on the audio, but she is sounding out those words. Like when she paused for flat, she went full at flat. And then she did the same for best, best. And then she sort of second guessed herself and thought that that didn't make sense in the sentence. But in fact, what we want kids to do is not necessarily, we obviously do want them to think about whether it makes sense, but rather than relying on what word makes sense, we want them to rely on the letters that are in front of them and what they know about what the letter E says when it's got a consonant after it. And so there's another piece here, I think, that Clara is going to read for you as well.
You read some nonsense words.
Shaft. Shelved. Wall. Dust. Cliff. Wretch. Shred.
That's right.
Front. Thought.
Okay, so the purpose of the nonsense words is for us to really distinguish between words that kids have memorized. And it's good to memorize words. Those are in your sight word vocabulary, or your sight word, the part of your brain where you have remembered how a certain word is spelled or how it looks. And when Clara was reading "A dog sat on the cat," you could see that "sat" was a word that she had in her sight memory. But when kids go up into the upper elementary age, they're going to be reading words that they haven't encountered before, and they're going to always need to sound out those words. And so we're really making sure that kids have the tools at this very young age to sound out words when they get older. It's super important.
Read me these sentences.
Sorry. Okay, and so there's different games you can play with your first grader at home, right? Things with magnetic letters on the fridge. And you can start out making the letters, and they can be real words or nonsense words. Put the letters together and then let the child say the word. With first graders, you do want to include some of those blends like S and K and skip, right? You can go to 4-letter words. And you can also start with some first graders to do 2-syllable words, right? Like hap and pen happen together, right? Scrambled words, you can put together some magnetic letters or some like letter cards and scramble them up, right? Some little words like jump or dog and have them unscramble them. You can also have them cut out words in a newspaper or magazine that they can read and make a collection of those words. There's some fun videos online that you can watch with kids, but given the time, I'm going to go ahead and move forward so that we can talk a little more about grade 2. So with grade 2, we really get into all the different vowel sounds, and you can see that there are so many different vowel sounds, like different ways to write vowel sounds. So E as a long E sound in tree, vowels that are controlled by an R, like when there's an R that comes after the vowel, you say it differently. ER, you say you don't say right? AW as in straw and AU as in August. Those have a fancy name. They're called diphthongs. So these are the words or the sounds and combinations that students need to learn in grade 2. And there's a lot of them. These are the kind of real words that grade 2 kids can read. And notice again, like I do think a lot of parents think that these words are fairly easy and should be first grade words, but they're really not. If a student is developing at a typical pace and they're going through each sound in a systematic, explicit, and sequential way, these are grade 2 words. The thing is that while some kids can move faster, and you always want to move as fast as the kids are able to, not all students are going to be able to pick up automatically these things because the brain isn't designed to naturally learn to read. It has to be taught. Teaching it now avoids problems that happen in the later grades when kids encounter longer words and don't really have the strategies to decode them. In our second grade, we really start to get into syllable division. The purpose of syllable division is to figure out what vowel sound to say in a syllable. We always read words syllable by syllable, even if we don't know that we're doing it as adults. And because vowel sounds are the trickiest and letters make the most different kinds of sounds, we really do have to figure out what sound each vowel is going to say. So here we have the word magnet, and because there are 2 consonants in between the 2 vowels, we know that it's going to be a closed syllable, and that A is going to say the short sound magnet, as if it were a kindergarten word, right? When we look here at steamboat, again, we have 2 consonants between the vowels, but in this case, we have vowel teams. We have the EA team, which says E, and the OA team, which says O. And we teach kids, right, that when you see 2 vowels teamed together, you say the sound of the first letter, right? The first letter says its name, steamboat. It's also really helpful when we get to when we have open vowels, because then you won't find 2 consonants between the vowels. So it's the difference between H-A-P-E-N, hapen, which is not a real word, or H-A-P-P-E-N, happen. It helps them notice R-controlled vowels. It helps them notice the magic E and also the consonant LE. So this starts in second grade, and it actually continues all the way up. We still use syllable division with our 8th graders. It's not as much a part of the program, obviously, but when we're decoding long words in science or social studies, it's really helpful. And students who have had this practice are much more able to decode unfamiliar words that they come across in a text. And therefore understand the text and learn the content of what's being presented in that text rather than not being able to understand it. So at home with second graders, you can make word ladders, which is how students would start at the bottom of a ladder shape, and they would write one word, like they might write can. And then as they go up the ladder, they need to change the word by just changing one letter. So how would we change can to a new word with one letter? We could change it to cane, by adding an E at the end, right? And then we would keep going from there to think of what word would come next if we changed one letter. And then you can also just keep an eye out for words as you're going around your world. At this point, at the end of second grade, there should be just about every word they see, they should be able to sound out with some help because they know all of the critical consonant and vowel patterns. And it's just a matter of using them at that point in longer and longer words. So I want to test your knowledge here just a little bit. I have a video that I found on Reading Rockets. Reading Rockets is a project of Maryland Public Television, and it is a good source to go to typically when you are wondering as a parent how you can help your child with reading. But this video in particular promotes a misconception about kids learning to read. And I just want to see if after this presentation, you can figure out what's going wrong, what this parent is doing that they could do better.
We want children to become fluent readers, meaning they can read the words in stories easily and quickly. But this takes practice, and it's normal for young kids to make mistakes when they read.
Says the fish to his friend. Mr. Jelly, I agree. I'd like to be more friend, but it isn't up to...
All right, let's try this again. Okay, so I'll read the sentence again, and then you read it back to me. You want to sound like how we talk, smooth and easy to understand, okay?
Oh.
So, I'd like to be more friendly, but it isn't up to me. Say that.
I'd like to be more friendly, but it isn't up to me.
Now, this is a great video because the parent and the child are reading together. The parent is being very encouraging of the child. So I love 90% of what this parent is doing and what the video is promoting. The one thing that I would caution you is, as you know now, you really need to prompt children to look at all the letters in the word. And so this child looked at the word friendly and she read friend and left off the ending. And so I really would have liked to have heard the dad say, oh, look, there's more letters in that word. Do you see the ly at the end? The ly is going to make the lee sound, friendly. And then he can have his daughter read it again. But we really want kids to look at every single letter in the word. And we do not necessarily want to ask kids to guess based on the picture or based on what would make sense in the sentence. Always direct your child back to what are the letters in this word and what sounds are these letters making. And if they don't know, you can help them, right? If she didn't know that ly makes the lee sound, then you can tell her, right? Sorry. So what if your child does have trouble learning to read? Well, you're not alone. Actually, last year, 69% of Maryland fourth graders didn't pass their end of year reading test. That's a huge percentage. We do think that some of that is involved in COVID, but a lot of it is also the fact that students aren't getting the teaching and the practice they need, looking at letters and blending them into sounds and words. That is not, 69% does not mean that we have that many students with reading disabilities. Only about 20% of all children are dyslexic or have some other reading disability. So there's obviously a lot of fourth graders who are able to read, have the capacity to read. They don't have any underlying disability that would require any extra or additional support, but they're still not passing their reading test. Even though 20% of children do have dyslexia, only about 4% are diagnosed. So it's a really very underdiagnosed disability or condition. So it's a good thing to keep an eye out for as your child is growing. If you're doing a lot of work with letters and sounds and the child seems to need a lot of practice and doesn't seem to be making progress, it's a sign to you to go ahead and reach out to your school and see what kinds of supports and assessments they can provide to you. So students learn best if they do learn in a structured literacy program. And a structured literacy program just means all of the things that we've been talking about tonight. Teaching students how spoken words are made up of sounds and how the sounds blend together to form words. Also how to take a spoken word and break it apart and write it down and spell it correctly. It teaches students the letters and letter combinations for each sound and also how to divide longer words into syllables and determine the vowel sounds. Everyone benefits from structured literacy, whether or not students have a reading disability, but more than 20% of students need structured literacy in order to learn to read fluently. So it's very, very important that students get this type of instruction. Unfortunately, schools aren't typically providing structured literacy. They're doing a lot of sight word memorization or looking at pictures to help kids guess what the words are. And that's really a problem because it doesn't set kids up for success later. So if you have questions and you're wondering about how your child is doing, you can have your child screened to see whether they are on track to become strong and fluent readers, or whether they are going to need some intervention or some extra supports to get there. So McLean does provide complimentary reading screenings for kids in kindergarten through 4th grade. Our next one is Saturday, June 3rd, but unfortunately it is all filled up at this moment. However, if you do email us, we will put you on our waiting list because we often have a few cancellations. And we also have them on a regular basis. We're planning another one for later in the summer. So if you do email us and you would like to have your child screened, we'll email you back to let you know when our next screening is and see if you're available. Okay, I'm going to end my presentation there, but this is my email address, so that you're welcome to email me with questions, or if there's any of the material from this slideshow that you'd like to see again, it will be available to you. And I think you're getting an email with a link to the recorded version of this video as well. So you can rewatch any portions that you might be interested in or that you might have missed. And I'm going to pause there and leave time for questions. We have about 10 minutes. And Kathy, I will turn it over to you to moderate the questions.
Great. Thank you, Natalie, so much. That was a wonderful presentation. So for the parents that are with us this evening, if you have a question, you can directly chat it to me, Kathy Patterson. We already have a few, but please feel free to send some more. So Natalie, one of the questions is, it looked like from your presentation that there's perhaps a specific program that is used for the reading that you described. I'm not sure what program my child uses at school, but is there a name for the program that you described tonight?
Right, so this, the research that shows that kids learn to read best by learning all the letters and sounds and blending them together is actually quite old. It's more than 70 years old. And that research was originally done by two reading specialists whose names were Orton and Gillingham. And so the name of this approach is called the Orton-Gillingham approach. You will get other different programs underneath Orton-Gillingham. So like a lot of schools do use the Wilson reading system. And one of their programs is called Foundations. So if your child is getting Wilson reading or Foundations, they are getting this practice with letters and sounds and blending them together. It's an approach, it's not a curriculum. And so each curriculum or each company that puts out materials for this work has a slightly different sequence in which they teach the letters and sounds. But for the most part, they put all the short vowels and consonants first and then go through basically in the order that we suggested. Things might move around a little bit on the edges, but for the most part, this is the main approach.
Okay.
If you
Thank you.
Google keywords like Orton-Gillingham or Wilson, you'll come up with more materials that will help you.
Another question was, my child is now 8.5 and did not have this direct type of reading instruction. Is it hard to start to tutor or provide this kind of instruction and go back to the earlier sounds that you introduced once he is reading, but once they start to read?
No, this is a good time for you to solidify any of these missing skills. And the way that you would do that is go through and with each letter and see which sounds the student knows and doesn't know, and then drill them in the ones that they don't know. It's obviously earlier is better, right? And it takes 4 times as much work to get a 4th grader back on track as it does to get a 1st grader back on track. So the sooner that you start to look at letters and sounds and help your child put those together, the better. But honestly, it is never too late. As a reading geek, I know of people who have done this work with illiterate people who are 70, 80 years old, and they're still able to learn to read exactly this way. So it's never too late, and you can always start. McLean School has some resources available. So if you, again, email me, there are some things that I can send you that could be helpful in working with your child. And also you can look for an Orton Gillingham or a Wilson tutor who would be able to help you.
Okay, there's one last question. My child's teacher keeps telling us that they are reading on grade level, but we know that they're not when we compare them to the older siblings. Is there, like, what's a good question, or how to ask a teacher or tell a teacher that you know they're not reading on grade level and to convince them to have them tested?
Right. A really great, I mean, one of our community reading screening is a great resource for you, because you'll be able to come to us, and as a third party, we don't have any stake in your child's education. We'll be able to test them and say, on a standardized, valid, reliable test, and say, yes, this child is progressing in a typical way, or this child will need intervention in order to be able to read fluently. And you can take that back to your school. If you're in a public school, you do have the right to request testing, regardless of whether the school agrees with you. And if you request testing in writing, they have 90 days in order to provide the testing. It's just a public service. You may not agree with the findings of their testing, but they will have to test your child.
Those are all the questions that we have this evening. So I want to thank everyone again, and certainly thank you, Natalie, for your time. As Natalie mentioned, everyone here tonight will receive a copy of the recording in an email that will be sent out to you. And just to follow up on what Natalie mentioned as far as McLean, while our admission deadline has passed, we do have some seats available in some of our primary grades, so would certainly welcome. We are now into rolling admissions, so you're welcome to reach out to the admission office and ask for myself. I'll put my name and email in there, and we'd be happy to speak with you about space available in certain grades and about the admission process. Actually, the email that you get is gonna, I think, come from me. So you'll have my name there and my email too. So if you respond to the email that you get, it'll come back to me, and I'll be happy to reach out to you and make the connection. And as I said, you can also call our office and ask for a time to either speak with me or set up a time to talk via Zoom. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, and have a great evening.